Welcome to this second video in which we're going to discuss the issue of communication with blind children in music education. First of all, let's remember the importance of communication. To communicate means to share something, to let someone become a sharer. From a psychological and social point of view, communication is a basic and spontaneous human need. As the psychologist Paul Václavic said in the first of his 5 axioms of human interaction, it is impossible not to communicate. Without going into too much depth, here are some general concepts on communication. In the communication process, the explicit communication is the message content, i.e. what I say. Some communication is intended to convey information, and in this case the most important element is the factual content of the communication. But we can also have what might be called a relational message, one in which the most significant element of the communication is the way in which it is effected. Relational communication might be about, for example, what I would like to be to you, what you mean to me, what role I would like to play, what I expect of you. The relational message is transmitted through the tone of voice, the rhythm of speech, gestures, behaviours, and the communication moment, whether it's too early or too late or just at the right time. One of the most frequent examples of the regressional model of teaching relationships is the mechanism of consensual invalidation. Let's look at some examples. A teacher might say, "I don't feel up to my role as your teacher." A student might say, "I don't feel part of this class." In this way, both teacher and pupil have invalidated one another's roles. The pupil behaves accordingly, as if I'm not your pupil, then I can leave the classroom, or I can do what I want during your lesson. The teacher, in turn, feeling inadequate to the task entrusted to him or her, can say, "I'm not prepared for this kind of disability, I can't cope with him or her." In this way, it's possible to have either an apathetic or an aggressive behaviour in both child and teacher. A common attitude among teachers can be, "Braille is too difficult, so we'll wait for the expert to check the homework." Or the child may feel that it is they who are teaching the teacher how to write in Braille. Context and social conventions are important elements of communication. There are rules, both written and unwritten, that govern communication. Let's now list some of the contexts in which communication takes place. Play, in the classroom, at home, private communication, public communication. Each context has its own rules, written and unwritten. They set the standards of good manners, etiquette and propriety. One should not brush one's teeth in a supermarket. One should sit down to eat. In Western countries we use cutlery. Elsewhere people may use their fingers to eat, and they might pass comment on the quality of food in ways that we would consider quite unacceptable. Often the blind child, especially if blind by birth, totally ignores such rules. So, for example, he or she might not shake hands to say hello, might turn his or her ear to the speaker instead of his or her face, because that's the position of maximum exposure towards the teacher. Often he or she might adopt inconvenient or uncomfortable postures, like putting their head down, or adopt behaviours such as rocking motions of the head or body, or putting their fingers in their eyes, or shaking their hands rhythmically, etc. It's all part of a way of communicating focused on the self. Very often people who work with blind children are confused and don't know how best to deal with such behaviours. Clear communication, including that physical contact that makes the caring presence of the adult felt, reduces these behaviours, which can otherwise negatively affect the image of the blind child to others, and by reflection affect their self-image. Communications with blind people are primarily acoustic or tactile. These should always be perceptible, clear and understandable. The clarity of oral communication and perception will be compromised if the sound is too faint. This may occur if it is too far away, or if it is too weak a sound, such as an object falling onto a carpet, or if it is too loud, so for example if speakers are set to too loud a volume, or indeed if the sound is confused, as might be the case in a gym or a swimming pool, for example. In the sighted world, communication is often partly gestural. In such situations, blind people will obviously experience problems. Here are two examples of such problematic communications. Go further over in that direction. The satchel is over there. Another difficulty which arises for blind people is the kind of non-verbal communication known as body language. Here are some examples. The look, the posture, gestures and movements, clothing, status symbols such as expensive watch or jewellery. Over and above what is said, the way in which the voice is used is a hugely important element in the communication process. Here are some ways in which the voice may be used. The tone of voice may be calm or excited. The pace of speech may be fast, slow, or irregular. The speech melody, the way in which the voice rises and falls, may be monotonous and flat, or interesting and expressive. The articulation of syllables may be clear or slovenly. Is it possible to communicate with more than just the voice? Yes, of course. There may be a significance in the distance from which one speaks, the direction from which one speaks. There may be physical communication, such as touching a shoulder or holding a hand. So what constitutes good verbal communication for a blind person? Obviously, one of the first things to do must be to make sure that no part of the communication is dependent upon body language. This means verbalizing all those responses that we so often signal with a look, a gesture, or our posture. For example, I agree, I don't agree, I can't hear you, I'm busy now, hurry up, I don't understand. All of these responses need to be made explicit through what we say and the way that we say it. Sometimes we need to verbalize more when communicating with a blind person than we might with sighted people. For example, a teacher may say you, pointing to or looking at a sighted student, and the student will know from the look and gesture that they are the you in question. Without the visual cue, however, the blind student has no means of telling if they are the one being addressed, and this can lead to a feeling of insecurity. Another example might be any form of visual humour, such as someone entering a room in fancy dress. Suddenly everybody is laughing, but the student doesn't know why. This can lead to a sense of isolation from the group. Words are of fundamental importance to a blind person. Some events can be described before they take place in order to improve comprehension of the event as it unfolds. Some events, if they do not develop too fast, can be described as they take place. Some news services offer audio description of their news bulletins, and some performances in the theatre, cinema, and even on television are provided with audio description. In some cases, it is necessary to provide further explanation after the event, when the scene has been too fast to be followed with simultaneous explanation. How can a blind person appreciate a work of art, a landscape, a sunset? Of course, we cannot give a blind person images or colours as we see them, although we may be tempted to try. What we can and indeed must do is to enrich the imagination and inner life of blind people, whether child or adult, by describing the scene that we see and telling in our own words the feelings we experience in front of a sunset or a mountain landscape, knowing that the blind person will capture some of the feelings in our words. These feelings are the human response to the visual experience that enables the blind to see at least to some extent through the words of others. Describing a landscape, a painting, or a scene is sometimes the only way to ensure that the blind person participates in the life of the group. On the other hand, for sighted people, describing what they are observing is a great exercise, and this is evident from some of the typical comments, such as, "Thank you, because describing it to you I've noticed a lot of details that I hadn't noticed before," or "Describing it helped me to see it better." In the above examples, we have stressed the need to give greater attention to our use of language in the presence of a blind person. Now we must look at what sort of language is needed. One approach is to imagine talking on the phone to someone. In doing so, we realise that expressions like over there and this way make very little sense. On the contrary, phrases like 2 steps to the right, or in the second drawer from the top, or next to your left foot are fully comprehensible. Many strategies for making language clearer have been devised. One of these is the use of a clock face. Sitting at a table, it's useful to indicate the location of the cutlery, the glass, and the last morsel on the plate using the metaphor of the clock face. For example, one might say, the fork is at 9 o'clock and the knife is at 3. Another good solution is to use analogies and metaphors to explain concepts that might be unclear or difficult to access. For example, to explain what a cloud is. Sometimes we can use physical objects to explain things. For example, we can explain the concept of angle by using a fan. There are some common errors often brought about by an effort to be overly courteous, or on the contrary, by an inconsiderate attitude to a blind person. Here are some examples. It is misguided to try to avoid expressions like see and look. Blind people are entirely comfortable with everyday expressions such as see you later. They are aware of the common meaning of the expression, which is that you will meet again later. They are well aware that the expression is not meant to be taken literally. Another common mistake is to talk to the carer instead of the blind person, as if they were incapable of answering for themselves. Questions such as, does he take sugar, have become a caricature of this type of behaviour. Equally misguided is the practice of speaking loudly, as if the blind person were also deaf or possibly foreign. Here are some precautions to be taken with language. Very often, what is said in words doesn't match the body language, or at least is modulated by the body language. Everybody notices this, except, of course, the blind person, and this can lead to misunderstandings and misinterpretations. So make sure that even the blind person can capture exactly what is meant in the words, and don't depend at all on body language. Here are some recommendations. When you meet a blind person, say hello first, since he or she doesn't see you. If it's been a long time since you met this blind person, say hello and then say your name. Whilst sighted people, when meeting someone, have the time to recognise them, blind people do not have this time because your greeting is the first sign that you are there. Other recommendations. Treat the blind person as you would a sighted person. Be polite, but above all be frank with blind people. They will appreciate this all the more. Feel free to use expressions such as see you or look at that. This gives the blind person the message that you are behaving normally. If you know a joke about blind people, just go ahead and tell it, and they will feel more at ease with you. If you're not sure you're doing well, just ask them. A final remark on difficult questions. The blind person is aware of arousing curiosity. If you think it is the right moment, go ahead with discreet questions. You won't annoy him or her. Rather, he or she will let you know if they accept your healthy curiosity. Curiosity and spontaneity can't be stopped in children. A blind child's peers may ask, why are your eyes closed? Why don't you see? Or why can't you walk by yourself? It's up to adults to supervise and mediate if necessary, to give honest answers, albeit with tact.